what we're speaking about is the monks and the nuns. There is Egyptian monastic writings. So the culmination of all the early church writings that we've studied, we figured, you know what, since we are the ancient church of Alexandria, since we are the Coptic Orthodox Church, let's take a look at the early Egyptian monastic writings and study them and benefit from them. Monasticism actually came out of Christian Egypt. The people who started it, it wasn't the Greek philosophers and the learned scholars. It was the fellaheen. It was the fellaheen, the farmers in Egypt of the country of the Nile. Asceticism, like strictness in practice, that was always part of Christian practice. It was always part of Christianity. But in this particular movement, it practiced asceticism away from the rest of the world. In the 4th century, when Christianity, remember, in 313, the Edict of Milan, Christianity became legal. It wasn't illegal anymore in 313. And in 381, Christianity was not only legal, it became the official religion of the empire. So now, everyone and their mother wanted to become Christian, but then they weren't as serious. Like when you were wanting to become Christian in the first couple centuries, it meant possibly martyrdom. So really only the serious Christians became Christians. Now, everyone was kind of becoming Christian. It was just kind of like following the crowd, the herd mentality and the thing to do. And so because of that, the Christians themselves, Christianity, people themselves became kind of watered down. And so in response to the church becoming worldly, some Christians left the world. So what kind of stuff would these monks write? There was monastic rules, like how to live monastic lives. There was ascetical treatises. There was collections of spiritual sayings of the fathers. And then we have writings of lives, like hagiographical writing, like, for example, Athanasius writing the life of Anthony, writing the life of a saint, sermons and letters. So many monasteries developed into centers of science. Like, you know how, if you look at modern universities, you know the modern universities that have very high, what are they called? Like Princeton and Harvard and Ivy League. If you look at all the Ivy League schools, guess what they started out as? Christian seminaries. They started off as like one of the major departments of them was the seminary, the theology department. And then as time went down, all the other departments got bigger, and the theology departments kind of decreased. But the monasteries were kind of like centers of study, centers of studying science, of studying language, of studying the Bible, of studying the fathers. And so they became outstanding centers of sacred science. We know about the development of monasticism from 2 special documents. One is called the Lausaic History of Palladius, and then the other one is called the History of the Monks of Egypt. There were 2 different kinds of monasticism. One of them is when someone went off on their own in isolation, like St. Anthony. And the other one is when groups of monks came together and lived together in community. This is what we call communal or Bohemian or koinonia. So the 2 types of monasticism in Egypt you have are the individual, where the person would live by themselves, and then the communal, when they would live in fellowship with others. So, to start off our discussion of the monks, we'll start off by talking about St. Anthony. St. Anthony is the one who initiated the isolation type of monasticism. He was born about 250 AD in Middle Egypt, and he died 355. So from 250 to 355. So how old was he when he died? 250, 355, 105 years old. After Anthony's parents died, he sold all their possessions, he gave to the poor, and he began to practice the ascetic life not far from his old home. After 15 years, when he was 35, he moved to the right side of the Nile in the outer mountain. For 20 years, he lived there in an abandoned fort, and many monks arose around him following his example in living alone. He didn't learn or study Greek, and some refer to him as being like illiterate. But it's not that he couldn't read or write, he just never studied Greek. But he knew Coptic very well. And we actually have many of his letters we have still the manuscripts of his letters still in existence now. He would say, which is first, mind or the letters? Which is the cause of which? Therefore, one who has a sound mind has no need of letters. To the good Anthony, there came a philosopher of the day and said, Father, how do you hold up, deprived as you are of the solace of books? And what Anthony said, he said, my book, philosopher, is nature, and thus I can read God's language at will. So he was really a holy man who sought God, who knew God, practical wisdom of seeing God in nature and throughout life and experiencing God day to day. He was really an example of life, of what a Christian should be. Who did I say wrote the life of Anthony? Our church is named after him. And it's not St. Mary. St. Athanasius, very good. So St. Athanasius is the one who wrote the life of Anthony. And St. Athanasius' life of Anthony, like say for example, I say, I'm going to write the life of Peter Bichet as a lesson for all of you. Okay, so I, Father John, I'm going to write the life of Peter Bichet. And then I write his life as an example to all of you and teaching you all what I want to learn. Okay? How much of it is what I want to say, and how much of it is like his life? You know, it's kind of like the two combined together. You know what I mean? So the same thing here. When St. Athanasius wrote the life of Anthony, he's writing about the life of Anthony. It's about Anthony, but at the same time, you also have Athanasius who wants to make certain points about the life of Anthony and so on, you know? And just like if you study Against the Heathen or On the Incarnation, it shows you what Christian faith is supposed to be. Studying the life of Anthony shows you what a Christian life is supposed to be. Like what On the Incarnation tells us about faith and theology, the life of Anthony tells us the same thing, but in practice. How is that faith and theology lived out in a practical way in real life? We have, like I said, several letters of St. Anthony that still exist. His first letter, if you want to know about the spiritual life, if you want to know about how to live a godly life, read the first letter of St. Anthony. He basically says, like, to know yourself, know God, and know God, know yourself. And he says, self-knowledge is an ever-growing perception of divine grace given to us. So he was very profound, he was very deep, he was very holy. He had knowledge, practical life knowledge of Christianity. You know, he had a wisdom that was a grace given from above. Like, if you or me don't understand something, what could we do? Say we're reading a passage in the letter to the Romans, and we don't get it. What do? Look it up. How? Google, right? We'll end up going to Google, we'll end up going to commentaries, we'll end up asking. You know what Anthony would do when he read something from St. Paul and he didn't get it? These holy monks would actually pray and ask St. Paul to explain it to them, you know? And he would. So it's like, you know, or they'd be reading something in Numbers or Deuteronomy and not get it. And they would pray, and then Moses would appear to them and explain what he meant. So, like, philosophers would come and try to trick him. And so they come all the way up, and they're like, okay, this guy's so holy, this guy's a holy man. You know, let's trick him. And then so they walk all the way up to meet him. And he says, oh, you philosophers, you made your way all the way up here just to see, you know, a simple, humble, ignorant man like me. And they're like, no, Anthony, you're wise and you're smart and you're holy and whatever. And he's like, all right. He's like, if that's the case, then why are you coming here trying to like stump me, or why are you coming here trying to like trick me, or like some of them will try to talk philosophy and try to convince him by that. And he's like, all right, bring a sick person or bring a dead person and philosophize to them and see what happens. Like nothing, But with faith and doing the sign of the cross, he'll end up healing people or end up raising people from the dead and doing miracles and so on. So Saint Anthony was an amazing, amazing example. And even his life, the life of Anthony, when St. Augustine read the life of Anthony, that was an integral part of Augustine's repentance and the change of his own life. So many people, through reading the life of Anthony, they themselves were affected by it. And what happened was, how St. Athanasius was exiled, and at one point he went to Rome? When St. Athanasius went to Rome, he had the book, The Life of Anthony, and it spread and was translated even in Rome and Italy, to the point where, how many Italians do you know now named Tony? Right? How many pizzerias are named Tony's Pizza? Right? It's all after, it's the effect of St. Anthony across the world. Make sense? So that is Anthony and the life of Anthony. A little bit about his holiness. He says, the devil is afraid of us when we pray and when we make sacrifices. He is also afraid when we're humble and good. He's especially afraid when we love Jesus very much. He runs away when we make the sign of the cross. So the power of the sign of the cross, the power of theology lived. The next person that we'll discuss is Ammonius. Ammon. Of Ammon. Having completed the full thread of your life, Ammonas, you have found life that could never be filled. Ava Ammonas was Ava Anthony's disciple, and he was the successor on the outer mountain. So Ava Ammon was the disciple of Anthony. He had previously lived in Ascetus. You know the word for asceticism? Ascetic? It comes from this word. So Ascetus, this same ascetic, it comes from the same root word. So Ava Ammon was the disciple of Anthony. He lived in Ascetus for 14 years in ceaseless prayer, and he was granted victory over anger. He later became a bishop, probably ordained by St. Athanasius the Great, and several letters we have are attributed to him. Here's an example of some of the writings and sayings. A brother asked Ava Ammon, "Give me a word," and the old man replied, "Go make your thoughts like those of the evildoers who are in prison." Why? For they're always asking when the magistrate will come, awaiting him in anxiety. Even so, the monk ought to give himself at all times to accusing his own soul, saying, "Unhappy wretch that I am! How shall I stand before the judgment seat of Christ? What shall I say to him in my defense? If you give yourself continually to this, you may be saved." So many examples of these kind of ascetical sayings. It was said of Ava Ammonas that he had killed a basilisk. Going into the desert one day to draw water from the lake and seeing a basilisk, he threw himself face to the ground, saying, "Lord, either I die or he does." And immediately by the power of God, the basilisk burst asunder. You know how crazy it is to live in the desert? There's serpents, there's scorpions, there's all kinds of weird creatures and stuff. Ava Ammon said, "I have spent 14 years in Ascetus, asking God night and day to grant me the victory over anger." One of the fathers, telling about the cells, said there was once a hard-working old man who wore a mat. He went to find Ava Ammon, who when he saw him wearing the mat said to him, "This is no use to you." But the old man questioned him in the following way: "Three thoughts occupy me. Either should I wander in the desert, or should I go to a foreign land where no one knows me, or should I shut myself up in my cell without opening the door to anyone, eating only every second day?" Ava Ammon replied, "It is not right for you to do any of these three things. Rather, sit in your cell and eat a little every day, keeping the word of the publican always in your heart, that you may be saved." Remember the story of the publican and the tax collector and the Pharisee? Right? What did the Pharisee say? "Oh, I fast, I give to the poor, I do this, I do that." And the publican could only just say, "I'm a sinner, Lord have mercy." Some brethren found life difficult where they were living. Wanting to leave, they came to find Ava Ammon, and he was out on the river. Seeing them walking along the bank of the river, he asked the sailors to put him ashore, and then he called the brethren, saying to them, I am Ammon, to whose dwelling you are wanting to go. Having comforted their hearts, he sent them back whence they had come from. For this difficulty did not arise from sickness of soul, but simply from natural annoyance. So these are examples of what they would do is you'd have all these holy men. And so you have people like St. Anthony, you have people like St. Pachomius, you have Ammon, and all these desert people, they would take down stuff that they said, or take down examples from their life, and they would just write it down, and then the monks would read these kind of things and learn from them, and live them and implement them. Now, not everything that monks do in the desert is meant for us. Like this is, some things are very serious, very harsh, very ascetic, and so for us who live normal lives, not everything applies, but it is good. Certain things we can learn from them, and certain Christian principles, we can apply to ourselves. Noah, would you mind coming up here? No. Sorry. I feel like I'm losing my voice, and since we're just reading this, I'm going to make you read for me if you don't mind. Okay. You don't mind, right?
No.
And you have a nice clear loud voice. Go ahead.
One day when Abba Amonis went to cross the river, he found the ferry boat ready to go and sat down.
Did I just read this?
No.
No, okay, go ahead.
Then another boat came to the place and transported the men who were there. They said to him, Come here, Father, and cross the river with us. But he replied, I will not embark except in the public vessel. As he had a handful of palm branches, he sat down, weaving them and then undoing them, until the boat came alongside. Thus he made the crossing. Then the brethren made him a reverence, saying, Why did you do that? The old man said to them, So as to walk without any anxiety of spirit. That is an example. We must walk in the way of God in peace.
7.
Abba Amonis was going to pay a visit to Abba Anthony one day, and he lost his way. So sitting down, he fell asleep for a little while. On waking, he prayed thus to God, I beseech you, O Lord my God, do not let your creature perish. Then there appeared to him, as it were, a man's hand in the heavens, which showed him the way till he reached Abba Anthony's cave.
If we get lost now, what do we use? Google Maps, right? They didn't have Google Maps in the middle of the wilderness in the desert. So if you get lost, you could just die, right? But he prayed to God, and he saw a hand point and direct him in the right way. These men, you know how you read in the Bible about Elijah being in the wilderness? And then Elijah would pray to God for food, and God would send him a raven to feed him? Did you ever hear the story about Amba Antonius and Amba Pavni? How God would send him a raven to send him half a loaf of bread. But the day that Anthony and Paul were together, God sent, instead of half a loaf of bread, a full loaf of bread. And they were like, oh, okay, now we know this is something that's godly. And same thing, when they were like in the wilderness, if they were sick, then God would heal them. But then when they went into the town, God wouldn't heal them. He'd say, now you're in town, now you're with people, go find a doctor. Or now you're around regular people, work and get food. So it's, but it's cool to see how much God led them and how much God was with them, because they have nothing but God in the wilderness. 8.
Abba Anthony predicted that this Abba Amonis would make progress in the fear of God. He led him outside his cell, and showing him a stone, said to him, Hurt this stone and beat it. He did so. Then Anthony asked him, Has the stone said anything? He replied, No. Then Anthony said, You too will be able to do that, and that is what happened. Abba Amonis advanced to the point where his goodness was so great, he took no notice of wickedness. Thus, having become bishop, someone brought a young girl who was pregnant to him, saying, See what this unhappy wretch has done, give her a penance. But he, having marked the young girl's womb with the sign of the cross, commanded that 6 pairs of fine linen sheets should be given to her, saying, It is for fear that when she comes to give birth, she may die, she or the child, and have nothing for the burial. But her accusers resumed, Why did you do that? Give her a punishment. But he said to them, Look, brother, she is near to death. What am I to do? And he sent her away, and no old man dared accuse anyone anymore.
Yeah, so his holiness of being so above evil and being holy and even seeing the future and knowing. It's just like, remember how when I was talking about God and I was saying like God is above time and God is not like limited? These people enter into that mind of God in that realm when they themselves are kind of almost not limited by time or space either. And that's how they can know things about the future. God reveals things to them. 9.
It was said of him that some people came to him to be judged, and Abba Monas feigned madness.
So he acted crazy.
A woman standing near him said to her neighbor, "The old man is mad." Abba Monas heard it, called her, and said, "How much labor have I given myself in the desert to acquire this folly? And through you I have lost it today."
Yeah. So did you ever hear of basically very, very holy people that out of humility, when people would come to them and try to praise them and seek their holiness, they would act like they're crazy. But it's because they're so humble that they didn't want to be seen as so holy and amazing that just act really stupid, you know? So it's kind of like out of humility, acting stupid and acting foolish, so people wouldn't think highly of them. Yep.
Abba Monas came one day to eat in a place where there was a monk of evil repute. Now it happened that a woman came and entered the cell of the brother of evil reputation. The dwellers in that place, having learnt this, were troubled and gathered together to chase the brother from his cell. Knowing that Bishop Amonis was in the place, they asked him to join them. When the brother in question learnt this, he hid the woman in a large cask. The crowd of monks came to the place. Now Abba Amonis saw the position clearly, but for the sake of God, he kept the secret. He entered, seated himself on the cask, and commanded the cell to be searched. Then when the monks had searched everywhere without finding the woman, Abba Amonis said, "What is this? May God forgive you." After praying, he made everyone go out. Then taking the brother by the hand, he said, "Brother, be on your guard." With these words, he withdrew.
Yeah, so instead of, he kind of covered for him, but then out of like holiness, and then obviously, even all the other monks, like everyone knew she was in there, you know, but no one's going to say, "Hey, Abba, get up." You know, like no one had, like, would dare to say something like that. It was kind of like Jesus when he met with the woman, you know, "Neither do I condemn you, go sin no more."
Abba Amonis was asked, "What is the narrow and hard way?" He replied, "The narrow and hard way is this, to control your thoughts and to strip yourself of your own will, for the sake of God. This also the meaning of the sentence, 'Lo, we have left everything and followed you.'"
So the self-denial of asceticism. Thank you. Stay there. Enba Pachomius. Okay. Enba Pachomius has a very special story. When the monks were developing in northern Egypt, basically, he was the first one to start the communal, like the monks living together. Because to live in great simplicity and in a wise ignorance is exceedingly wise. A quote about being simple of heart and mind. You know how there's so many monastic orders now? Like there's the order of Saint Pachomius, there's the order of Saint Shenouda. And then even in the Western Church, you end up having like several kinds of monks, Benedictine monks and Jesuit, and all these different kind of orders. The first kind of order, the first kind of organization of monks living together in a communal life is Pachomius. That's why we say our father, Abba Pachom, the father of the Koinonia, the father of the monks who live together in fellowship. He was actually born not a Christian. His parents were pagan, and when he was 20 years old, he was serving in the army. When he arrived with the army, with the fellow people to Thebes, to Luxor, the local Christians were very hospitable. So imagine soldiers coming in. You probably heard this story in Sunday school. The soldiers are in the army, and they're coming in, and then the local people in Luxor were so hospitable, they were like, "Come, let us feed you." And they fed them, and they washed their feet, and they took care of them, and so on. And so he was so touched by this. He's like, "Wow, what is up with these people?" And then he himself, because of their Christian witness, he himself in the year 314 AD, he became a Christian. And then after that, he became a monk. And he lived under Ava Palemon in 317. He lived under him for 7 years. About 323 AD, he started the first communal monastery right on the bank of the Nile. This wasn't the first time that people lived communally together, but what was new was the Pachomian rule, the first rule that provided a government in the spirit of community, uniformity, poverty, obedience, and discretion. He died in 346, Put it this way. Say that a bunch of people got together and they were like, you know what? We want to just live as real Christians. We want to get together and we want to live as real Christians. What can we do? So they got together and it's almost like making this community where everyone did their role and everyone had a job and everyone did their own thing. But the whole point of it was to live loving God and loving others in a real Christian community, in a real Christian life. You know, all the other groups that do that today learn from this kind of ideal from St. Paul. Questions? Okay. Saint Macarius. We mentioned the three saints of a Macarius. So we have three Saints Macarius. The first one is Saint Macarius, who is the elder, or the great, or the Egyptian. He goes by all these three names. So Saint Macarius the elder, Saint Macarius the great, Saint Macarius the Egyptian. He was the spiritual hero of the monastic community at Askidus. He was born about 300 AD in a village in Upper Egypt. And at 30 years old, he went to the desert to live as a hermit, and he stayed there for 60 years. A pregnant woman accused him of having defiled her. Macarius did not attempt to defend himself, and he accepted the accusation in silence, kind of like what happened to Marina. However, when the woman's delivery drew near, her labor became exceedingly difficult, so she did not manage to give birth until she confessed Macarius' innocence. So he himself, when he was falsely accused, didn't say a word and was willing to take it. But then when she was going through labor and going through a lot of problems, she realized that this was something from God, and then she told the truth about what happened, about how he's really innocent. A multitude of people then came asking for his forgiveness and his blessing. So what he did was he fled to the Nutrian desert to escape the worldly glory. While at the desert, he visited St. Anthony the Great, and he learned from him the laws and the rules of monasticism. When he returned to the ascetic desert at the age of 40, Askidus, he presided over its monastic community for the rest of his life. When he was 40, he received the grace of healing and foretelling the future. So it really, very charismatic, holy gifts. They were able to do miracles, they were able to know the future, they were able to heal. You really see great signs and wonders of God. He was ordained to the priesthood, and he became famous for his preaching and his instruction. There's a collection of 50 spiritual homilies that are attributed to him. That's Saint Macarius the Great, Saint Macarius the Elder. There's also Saint Macarius the Alexandrian. He's also known as Macarius the Younger, as opposed to the first one who's the elder. He was born about 300 in Alexandria, and he worked as a merchant. At the age of 40, he was baptized and he became a monk. Both him and Macarius the Elder were exiled together. Due to miraculous healings, they converted many pagans to Christianity. He seems to have had the gifts of prophecy, healing, and casting out demons. He died about 394 AD, about 100 years old, so they were around the same time, both of these Macariuses. In addition to the monastic rule and three brief other writings, there's a homily on the end of the soul and the righteous, and the sinners is ascribed to him. So we mentioned, remember the hymn Pinishti, the great Eva Anthony, Nempith me Ava Pavli, the righteous Ava Paul, Nempi Shomt Ethoeb Macarius, the three Macariuses. So I think I even include the text of Pinishti in a little bit, but we remember a lot of these fathers even in our hymns. There's one man named Evagrius of Pontus. He was around from 345 to 399 AD, so second half of the 4th century. He was a well-known thinker, speaker, and a gifted writer. My favorite quote of his is he says, "The theologian is the one who prays." The person who prays. What does theology mean? What does it mean? Call it out.
Study of religion.
Yeah, well, the study of God. Theos would be God, right? So the knowledge of God. And if you really want to know God, who is the person who has knowledge of God? The one who prays. Okay? His quote again, Evagrius of Pontus. The theologian is the one who prays. So if you really want to be a theologian, it's not just about mind knowledge, it's about actually praying and living a Christian life. So the one who prays is the real theologian. It's my favorite quote from Evagrius. He was born into a Christian family in the small town of Ebora in the late Roman province of Helenopontus. He was educated in Caesarea, where he was ordained as a reader under St. Basil the Great. Around 380, he joined Gregory the theologian in Constantinople, where Gregory had been installed as bishop, and he was promoted to deacon. He stayed in Constantinople after Gregory, and he eventually became an archdeacon. When the Emperor Theodosius I convened the Second Council in 381, Evagrius was there. He was present. For a short time, he stayed with Melania the Elder and Rufinus in a monastery near Jerusalem. But even there, he could not forsake vainglory and pride. He apparently took special care of his dress and spent too much of his time sauntering through the streets of the cosmopolitan holy city. He fell gravely ill, and only after he confessed his troubles and accepted instruction to become a monk was he restored to health. After being made a monk in Jerusalem in 383, he joined a communal community of monks around 385, and after some years he moved from there. He spent the last 14 years of his life pursuing studies under St. Macarius of Alexandria and Macarius the Great. So he lived for the last part of his life under the previous two men that we just read about. He was ordained a reader by Basil the Great and a deacon by Gregory the theologian. So he was discipled under Basil, discipled under Gregory, and so he had a very holy community and examples around him. There was a gentleman named Palladius. Palladius was the one who, think of him as a historian who gathered together these writings. He's the historian of Egyptian monasticism. In 388, he went to Egypt to get acquainted with the hermits. And then he started writing everything that he saw and heard. His writings described monasticism in the 400s. Palladius, he was bishop of Helenopolis in Bithynia, and a devoted disciple of St. John Chrysostom. He's best remembered for his work. This is what's called the Sayings of the Desert Fathers. If anyone has this book, The Sayings of the Desert Fathers, it occurs in 2 volumes. What we know about the Desert Fathers, the monastic writers, is mostly from what Palladius gathered together. So you know how before I was reading the sayings of Anthony or the sayings of Ammonius or the sayings of... So Palladius is the one that gathered all this stuff together and put in a book. He traveled to Egypt to meet the example Christian monks, the Desert Fathers, for himself. He wanted to benefit from them. In 388, he arrived in Alexandria, and about 390, he passed on to Natria, and after a year later to a district in the desert known as Celia, from the multitude of its cells, where he spent 9 years, first with Macarius of Alexandria, and then with Evagrius. At the end of his time, his health was broken down, and he went to Palestine in search of a cooler climate. In 400 AD, he was ordained to be bishop of Helenopolis, and his great work, written between 419 and 420, was then called the Lausaic History, being composed for Lausus, chamberlain to the court of Theodosius. He died sometime in the decade between 420 and 430. So the end of the 300s, the early 400s, he wrote this book that he gathered together somewhere in the early 400s, so by the year 420. And now we have the history of the Desert Fathers because of what Palladius wrote. Saint Isidore of Pelusium. Isidore was born in Egypt to a prominent Alexandrian family. He became an ascetic, and he moved to the mountains near Pelusium in the tradition of the Desert Fathers. He's known to us for his letters written to Cyril of Alexandria, Theodosius II, and a bunch of others. A collection of 2,000 letters was made in antiquity at the Sleepless Monastery in Constantinople, and this has come down to us through a number of manuscripts with each letter numbered and in order. The letters are most very short extracts, a sentence or two in length. Further unpublished letters exist in Syriac translations. Some of the letters are of considerable interest for the exegesis of the Greek Bible, and he is revered as a saint. Isidore lived during the 4th and 5th centuries. He was a native of Alexandria. He was a relative to both Saint Theophilus and Saint Cyril. He was the only child of his parents who sought his education. They taught him the books of the church and the Greek language, which he excelled at. He was also ascetic and humble. When he learned that the people of Alexandria and the bishops wanted to make him the patriarch, he ran away and he became a monk in a monastery. He soon became known for his exactitude in the observance of the rule and for his austerity. A passage in his writings affords reason to believe that he held the office of abbot. Following the example of St. John Chrysostom, whom he managed to see and hear during a trip to Constantinople, he devoted himself to Christian preaching. Yet he writes in one letter, "It is more important to be proficient in good works than in golden-tongued preaching." So it's better to actually live your life as a Christian than to be able to preach to others. Through the initiative of St. Isidore, the Third Ecumenical Council was convened at Ephesus in 431, at which the false teaching of Nestorius concerning the person of Jesus Christ was condemned. So he was there for 431. He died probably around 450. And the only existing work that we have of St. Isidore are considerable correspondences. So it's actually we have a bunch of letters, over 200 letters. 2,000 letters of his still exist. These letters of St. Isidore may be divided into 3 categories: those dealing with dogma and scripture, those dealing with church and monastic discipline, and those dealing with practical morality for the guidance of regular people. If you want to talk about Coptic literature, if you want to study Coptic literature, the main guy, the core guy to study literature that's actually written in the Coptic language is Saint Shenouda. There's even something called the Saint Shenouda the Archimandrite Coptic Society, and it's basically studying the Coptic language and studying the Coptic literature that exists. Saint Shenouda was born in 348 and he died in 466. He's called Shenouda the Great, Saint Shenouda the Archimandrite. He was the abbot of the White Monastery in Egypt. So the monastery was known as the White Monastery. He was one of the most renowned saints in the Coptic Orthodox Church. He was born in 348 AD in Upper Egypt to devout Christian parents. His uncle was Emba Bigol. His father was his uncle was Saint Bigol, another famous Egyptian saint, and the founder of the monastery in Upper Egypt, known as the White Monastery. At a young age, he helped take care of his father's flock of sheep. During one of his trips to his uncle's monastery, his uncle kept him as a result of a vision and later made him a monk. Around 385 AD, he was chosen by his fellow monks to succeed his uncle as the abbot. And when he took over that task, the monastery was inhabited by 30 old monks. By the time of his death in 466, the monastery had 2,200 monks and 1,800 nuns who lived over an area about 3,000 times the original size. So originally his monastery was 30 monks. By the time he died, 2,000 monks and almost 2,000 nuns living monastic lives. He was at the Council of Ephesus. Because of his popularity and his zeal for the faith, he was chosen by St. Cyril the Great to accompany him in representing the Church of Alexandria at the Ecumenical Council of Ephesus in 431. There he provided the moral support that St. Cyril needed to defeat the heresy of Nestorius, the Bishop of Constantinople. The eventual exile of the latter to Akhmin, Shenoudi's backyard, was a testimony to the impression that Shenoudi had made upon the entities of this council. His death. He died in the 7th Abib, which is July 14th, 466. Following a short illness possibly brought upon by advanced age, he died in the presence of his monks. From his uncle, Shenouda inherited a monastery based on the Bacomian system, though more austere and stringent. This made his followers few in number and probably promoted decline rather than growth. Shenoudi implemented a more comprehensive system that was less stringent and more suitable to the surroundings and the background of the people. The new system had an unusual component, which was a covenant to be recited and adhered to by everyone who was new coming in. They would say, I vow before God in this holy place, the word which I have spoken with my mouth being my witness. I will not defile my body in any way. I will not steal. I will not bear false witness. I will not lie. I will not do anything deceitfully secret. If I transgress what I have vowed, I will see the kingdom of heaven, but will not enter it. God, before whom I made this covenant, will destroy my soul and my body in the fiery hell, because I have transgressed the covenant I made. So transgressions of the covenant were expelled from the monastery altogether. This was considered a near-death sentence for those peasant monks. Another interesting feature of Shenouda's monasticism was the requirement for the new novices to live outside the monastery for a period of time before they were deemed worthy to be consecrated as a monk. This seemed to be at odds with the Nitrian monastic system, which allowed the monks to live away from the monastic settlements only after they became proficient in the monastic life. Shenouda also utilized the time of the monks outside prayer and worship in more varied tasks within the monastery than the Nitrian model was exposed to. Aside from the traditional trades of rope and basket weaving, the monks engaged in weaving and tailor linen, cultivating of flax, leatherworking and shoemaking, writing and bookbinding, carpentry, metal and pottery making. So they were well-rounded in working. All in all, Shenouda tried as much as possible to employ the monks in their old professions. Such activities made the monastery a vast self-supporting complex, which occupied some 20 square miles. So even like some of the monasteries are today, it becomes this like little village or a little city on its own that has so many people working, that produces so many things, that brings in money, that it becomes like its own little city. As a monastic leader, St. Shenouda recognized the need for literacy among the monks. He required all of his monks and nuns to learn to read and write, and encouraged more of them to pursue the art, the different arts of like manuscripts. This made the monastery more and more appealing to belong to, and consequently it made the threat of expulsion more painful. In his laudatory life of St. Shenouda, his disciple St. Wisa, we say even in the liturgy, Ava Shenouda the Archimandrite, and Ava Wisa, his disciple. So his disciple St. Wisa recounts several incidents of Shenouda coming to the aid of poor Egyptian peasants. One time he went to Akhmin to chastise a pagan because of the oppression he was inflicting on the poor. Another time he acted to eliminate the cause of grief to peasants that the pagan landlords forced upon them. A third occasion, he risked his life to successfully ask for the freedom of the captives at Psoi from the hands of warriors. He also at times appealed on behalf of the peasants to those in power, even to the emperor. In summary, St. Shenouda fully recognized the misery of his people, and he emerged as their sincere advocate and popular leader. So St. Shenouda as a writer. Basically, to talk about St. Shenouda and his writings is to talk about Coptic literature at its best. So if you want to know about Coptic literature, what exists in Coptic writings, again, this was from the time of the 300s and 400s. The people who did their PhDs in Coptic literature studied St. Shenouda the Archimandrite. He wrote in a style that was essentially his own, with writings based on careful study of the scholastic rhetoric of his time, which displayed the wide and deep range of knowledge he possessed. They were adorned with endless quotations from Scripture, a typical feature of Patristics writings. The Scriptures were quoted whenever a presented argument needed support. In doing so, St. Shenouda displayed an astonishing memory as he rendered these passages with amazing accuracy. St. Shenouda's knowledge was not confined to the Holy Bible. He was fluent in both Coptic and Greek and was fairly well acquainted with Greek thought and theology. The sprinkling of Greek loanwords in his writings was both extensive and sophisticated, and was definitely not a product of his living environment. He also expressed knowledge of the works of Aristotle, Aristophanes, Plato, and even some of the Greek legends. He certainly read some of St. Athanasius' works, like the Life of Anthony, and some of his homilies. Shenouda also knew the letters of St. Anthony, some of the letters of St. Pachomius, and most likely some of the works of Evagrius. His knowledge further extended to such popular non-canonical texts as the Acts of Archelaus and the Gospel of Thomas. The writing of St. Shenouda can be grouped into 4 categories. The first one is moral sermons. This category includes the richest collection that have survived. Among his works here is one about disobedience to the clergy, and he stressed the benefit of obedience and the punishment of disobedience. He also wrote about the nativity and the glorification of the Lord, where he discussed free will and the place of chastity in a monastic life. So the first kind of writings is moral sermons. The second one is like against the pagans. In one place, he portrayed the pagans as worse than demons whose idols shall rightly be destroyed by the Christians. In another sermon, he aimed his attack against the pagan, probably a magistrate, who troubled the monks. In the third sermon, he attacks the concept of fate in the opinion of the idolaters as the controlling factor of the life of the person. So he spoke about free will against fate. And then he encounters with the teaching that nothing actually happens without the will of God. So moral sermons, sermons against pagans. He also wrote a lot of writings against heretics. He directs his attack against the heretics who corrupted the faith. One encounter in this category of Shenouda's longest work, which was probably written as a treatise rather than a sermon. This is the work against the Origenists and the Gnostics. The aim of this work was to oppose heretics in general, and Origenists in particular, with regard to their apocryphal books that they used and they circulated. He also touched upon the subjects of plurality of the worlds, the position of the world, work of the Savior, and the meaning of our Pesach. Other subjects mentioned in the treatise were the relationship between the Father and the Son, the origin of souls, Christ's conception, the Eucharist, resurrection of the body, and many other things. Sermons based on interviews with magistrates. He also wrote, to the magistrates and those who were like in authority. So Saint Shenouda, if you want to know about Coptic literature, he is like the guy for Coptic literature. Actually, we heard a lecture once that talked about Coptic literature, and it was all about Saint Shenouda, and it was all about his life and all about his writings, and we studied them in a conference in detail. And so this is we refer to him as Saint Shenouda the Archimandrite. Now again, let's look at some. So this is the hymn Pinishti, where we remember them. The great Ava Anthony, the righteous Ava Paul, the three saints Ava Macari, Ava John the Short, Ava Pshoi, Ava Paul, our holy Roman fathers, Maximus and Numidius, Ava Moses. It's mentioning all the holy people, Ava Shenouda, Ava Isidorus. It's mentioning all these holy people, and then all those who have rightly taught the word of truth, the Orthodox bishops, priests, deacons, clergy, laity, and all the Orthodox faithful. Amen. So this hymn is kind of like a celebration of our fathers, a celebration of the monks, those who kept the holiness and lived the faith and kept the faith for us. Now, let's read, in these last few minutes we have of class, we'll read through the sayings of Saint Anthony. You can sit it down now. So this is to give you an example of more of the writings and more of their sayings. Let's read the actual writings and sayings of Saint Anthony himself. Go ahead.
When the holy Abba Anthony was living in the desert, he was in a state of melancholy, and his mind was darkened by a multitude of imagined things.
Pause. If you were sitting in the desert all day, how do you think you'd feel?
Bored.
Bored, right? Depressed. So at one point in his life, he got kind of bored, kind of like depressed. So let's see what happened.
And he said to God, Lord, I want to be saved, but these thoughts will not leave me alone. What shall I do in my trouble? How will I be saved? A little later, when he went outside, Anthony saw someone like himself, sitting and working, then rising from work and praying, and again sitting and plaiting a rope, then again rising for prayer. It was an angel of the Lord sent for the correction and insurance against stumbling of Anthony. And he heard the angel saying, Do this, and you will be saved. And when he heard this, he had great joy and courage, and did this, and was saved.
So when St. Anthony was falling into depression, what vision did he see? What was the person doing?
Working and praying.
Working and
praying.
So do something. That's kind of like the message that he got. You know how we talk about self-esteem in kids? Oh, we need to give kids self-esteem. We need to say good boy, good girl. Oh, very good. How do you get self-esteem?
Doing stuff.
Do something. Exactly. It's like accomplish something and do something, and then you'll be like, you feel good. You know, it's like, do you ever just feel like a lazy bum? Get out and like run a mile, and then you'll be like, I feel good now. Like you did something, you know? Or like study and get a good grade, and you're like, wow, I did something. Or work hard at something and achieve, and you'll be like, wow, I did something, you know? But we can learn a lesson from St. Anthony today, because a lot of times we say, oh, we have to give people self-esteem by being nice, by saying nice things. No. You want self-esteem? Accomplish something and do something. You know, because if you don't do anything and you don't accomplish anything, you're going to feel unfulfilled. Did I ever tell you the story of one of my friends from high school? So one of my friends from high school, whatever, he got through high school, he passed, but he didn't really study that hard. And then it came time for graduation. And how do people feel at high school graduation?
Good.
They're like, yes, I'm graduating, I get to move on, right? It's a happy feeling. For him, like he got like all C's, and he just barely passed. And then so graduation was kind of like, he kind of felt like garbage, like it wasn't fulfilling, you know? And then thank God he ended up getting into a decent college, and he's like, you know what, in college it's going to be different. And he ended up really working hard, being really successful in college, ended up being like an engineer. And it was like a night and day difference. When you actually work hard at something, when you actually achieve, that's what gives you like self-confidence. That's what gives you like good feelings, you know? But if you're, so he himself was bored. He was told actually work and actually pray. Like actually get up and do something and be productive with your time. And then with that you'll have fulfillment. 2.
When Abba Anthony meditated upon the depth of the judgments of God, he asked, saying, Lord, how is it that some perish when short-lived, and some live to extreme old age? And why are some poor, and yet others rich? And why are the unrighteous rich, and yet the righteous are poor? And he heard a voice saying to him, Anthony, keep your attention on yourself, for these things are the judgments of God, and they will not benefit you to learn them.
Did you ever question really difficult questions about life? Go back to 2. I really like this one. Like you have, why are some people born Christian, and some people are like not born Christian? Why are some people like poor, and why are some people like rich? You know, somebody can live 105 years and live like a great life with being healthy and having food and having all these things. You know, another person can only live a very short life, and all their life is in a time of war and extreme like poverty. Did you ever? This shows you these monks thought like they were holy men, and they questioned things. And like, you know, why is it that some people live really long and then some people die young? Why is it that some people are poor and yet others are rich? You know, why is it that bad people seem like they're successful and yet righteous people are struggling? And so these are real questions about life. And what was God's response to him?
Don't worry. Think about yourself.
Mind your business,
Yeah.
right? Worry about your own life. Focus on your own salvation. Focus on your own. Keep your attention on yourself. For these things are the judgment of God, and they will not benefit you to learn. So it is interesting that, you know, St. Anthony himself had these same questions, you know. But the answer is also interesting. Mind your business and worry about yourself. Like, worry about what's beneficial for you, and I'm taking care of the world, so don't worry about the world, in a sense. 3.
Someone asked Abba Anthony, saying, What must we keep in order to be pleasing to God? And the elder answered, saying, Keep what I tell you. Whoever you may be, always keep God before your eyes. And whatever you do, do it from the witness of the Holy Scriptures. And in whatever place you live, do not leave quickly. Keep these 3 things, and you will be saved.
Okay. No, back. Whoever you may be, always keep God before your eyes. That was simple, right? Always have God in front of you. Okay, whatever you do, do it from the witness of the Scripture. And then 3, and in whatever place you live, don't leave it quickly. Why would he say that? Why would he say don't move around too much? What do you think this means? If you pick a tree and you plant a tree in like one place, putting a tree in one place will give it stability, will give it growth, will give it. It's almost like be where you are and focus on one thing and grow in that and learn in that. How can I explain? Well, I'll give you an example. Say, for example, you want to say for example you're going to college, right? And in the first semester in college, you're going to say, you know what, I want to be a doctor. And in the second semester in college, you know what, I want to be an engineer. And then first semester sophomore year, you know what, I think I want to be a teacher. And then fourth semester in college, you know what, I think I want to be an actor. And then fifth semester in college, you know what, I think I want to be a lawyer. And say for example, in 4 years of college and 8 semesters, say that you changed your major 8 times in 4 years. What's going to happen at the end of 4 years?
You're not going to be done.
You're not going to, near being done, right? If you, to actually finish college, pick one thing, focus it, finish it, study it, and then like move on. It's kind of like pick one thing and finish it, and then move on. And there's so many applications of this. Like even like reading a book. How many of us can start a book and like start reading and then stop? And then you start another book and you start reading it and you stop. And you start reading another book and you start reading, and before you know it, you have like 10 books that you started reading but you didn't finish any of them. So it's like pick one thing, finish that one thing, and then move on to the next. Even in life, like do one thing at a time, focus on it and finish it. And the same principle here. One of the rules of the monks was like don't move around too much, but get deep planted in one place. And because if you're constantly hopping, there's no completing, there's no stability, there's no fullness. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to get Anthony's sayings and see what they meant to him. But then how can we apply these things? So the way you can apply this to yourself, always have God before your eyes, always have the Christian teachings and the scriptures in your mind, and do one thing at a time and finish it. Don't jump around too much where you start something and don't finish it, and start something and then don't finish it, and start something and don't finish it. One thing at a time, do it wholeheartedly with all your mind, with all your heart and your soul, finish it, then move on to the next. Multitasking is not good, and it's actually not productive. Right? 4.
Abba Anthony said to Abba Bohem, this is the great work of man, always to take the blame for his own sins before God and to expect temptation to his last breath.
The great work of man. So Abba Bohem, I think in Arabic this is the name that can translate to be yeah. So the great thing that you could do is anything that you did wrong in the past, take responsibility for it. Number 2, expect temptation to your last breath. So expect to fight, expect temptation to your last breath, and take responsibility for any faults, for any mistakes, for any sins of your past. 5.
He also said, whoever has not experienced temptation cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. He even added, without temptations, no one can be saved.
We need to conquer temptation. We need to overcome temptation. 6.
Abba Pumbo asked Abba Anthony, what ought I to do? And the old man said to him, do not trust in your own righteousness. Do not worry about the past, but control your tongue and your stomach.
7.
Abba Anthony said, I saw the snares that the enemy spreads out over the world, and I said, groaning, what can get through from such snares? Then I heard a voice saying to me, humility.
So he saw all the traps that the demons were laying to make people fall throughout the world. He was like, what could possibly overcome all these tricks of the devil? And the voice he heard told him, humility. Not relying on myself, but relying on God is the only way. Next.
He also said, some have afflicted their bodies by asceticism, but they lack discernment, and so they are far from God. He said also, our life and our death is with our neighbor. If we gain our brother, we have gained God. But if we scandalize our brother, we have sinned against Christ.
Our life and our death is with our neighbor. It shows you how important we are to each other. There is no just like me and God. It's how I deal with others. I'm told to love God and I'm told to love others. Everything is about that relation. The relation between me and God, the relation between me and everyone else. My salvation is in my blood. 10.
He also said, just as fish die if they stay too long out of water, So the monks who loiter outside their cells or pass their time with men of the world lose the intensity of inner peace. So, like a fish going towards the sea, we must hurry to reach our cell, for fear that if we delay outside, we will lose our interior watchfulness. He said also, he who wishes to live in solitude in the desert is delivered from 3 conflicts: hearing, speech, and sight. There is only one conflict for him, and that is with fornication. Some of the brothers came to Abba Anthony to tell him the dreams they had seen, and to learn from him if they are true or from demons. Now they had a donkey, and it died on the way. When they finally came to the elder, he said to them first, "How did the little donkey die on the way?" They said to him, "How did you know that, Abba?" And he said to them, "The demons showed me." And they said to him, "That is why we came to ask you, lest we be led astray, because we have seen dreams, and many times they are true." And the elder fully convinced them by the example of the donkey that they are from demons.
Next. All right, back to 12. You guys get this one? Do you get what happened? Okay. So say, for example, you're St. Anthony there sitting in the back, right? No, you're good, you're good. So say, for example, Mark is St. Anthony sitting from the back, right? And then Peter, stand up for a second. Come up here. All right, now here. You are, make believe you're Mark, okay? And then make believe you're Peter, and then make believe I'm a devil, okay? So Mark, Peter, devil. Peter will say, "Oh, I think I'm going to go visit Mark." Say that.
I think I'm going to go visit Mark.
Now take a couple steps. Now, the demons and the angels have minds, so they see things. They know what's going on. So the demon said, "Oh, I heard Peter say he's going to go visit Mark, right? And I saw him walking as if he's going to go visit Mark." So the demon gets up and goes over here, and the demon goes, "Yo, Mark, Peter's going to come visit you." So he's just sitting here by himself, in his own cell, away from everyone else. And a demon comes in and says, "Yo, Mark, Peter's going to come visit you." Now, continue. Now he shows up, and then he's thinking to himself, "Wow, I heard a voice telling me that Peter's going to come visit me, and Peter came to visit me. Wow, I must be a very holy man." The devil can see what's happening and make a guess about the future from it. Thank you. You can have a seat. Does that make sense? Okay. How do meteorologists tell the weather? You know how it's supposed to snow and they say, "Oh, we're going to get whatever, 4 to 6 inches"? How do they know the weather?
Satellites.
What? Satellites? What were you going to say? So they look at whatever they look at, and they say, "Hey, it's going to rain," or "Hey, it's going to snow," or "Hey, it's going to be sunny." Are they fortune tellers? Do they know the future? No, but they can look at symptoms. They can look at things that are happening and make a guess at what's going to happen because of that. Same thing like a doctor. If you go to a physician and you say, "I'm having this symptom and this symptom and this symptom," the doctor will say, "Okay, from what I'm understanding about what you're saying, this and this and this leads to this, and this is what will happen." And does the doctor know the future? No, it's seeing something happening and putting 2 to 2 together and figuring it out, right? In the same way, demons can't predict the future. God is the only one who knows the future. But demons are smart, and they can make educated guesses, just like a meteorologist can tell you about weather, and just like a doctor can forecast about health. The demons can see something happening and forecast it, And then say, for example, everything that's about to happen, I'm like, "Yo, Mark," and I tell him. "Yo, Mark," and I tell him. "Yo, Mark," and I tell him. And then all of a sudden, what's going to happen? He's going to keep. What's going to happen?
He's going to keep talking.
I'm going to keep. And then how will he? What is his reaction to me? Well, you start trusting me, right? Now all of a sudden, you think that you're great and you know all these things. Now you start trusting me. Now all of a sudden, I slip in one line and I make you fall. It's that's the demon's tricks. How even there was demons that would say, "Oh, this is Even when demons would try to speak the truth, Jesus would shut them up and be like, don't talk. You know, even when they would say, because, and even, there was one example, I think it was, I don't know if it was St. Peter or St. Paul in the book of Acts. As they were walking around preaching, someone was possessed by a demon following them around, saying, this is the servant of the Most High God. This is the servant of the Most High God. This is the servant of the Most High God. To the point where the apostle got so annoyed. He was like, shut up. And he cast the demon out of the person and told him not to speak again. So even when demons tell the truth, you find Christ and you find the holy people shutting them up because they could try to use that. It's like someone who goes to a fortune teller. Okay? If the person is really demonic, if the person has really supernatural connections, they can tell you, oh, I know you. Your name is Noah. You have a sister named Natalia. Your mother, her name is Lily. You live in such and such a place. And this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And then what's his reaction? Whoa. This fortune teller is like real. Then she tells you something, and then you believe it. And then you can even end up adjusting your life to what the person said and making mistakes. And so that's why we don't rely on fortune tellers. We don't rely on magic and sorcery. And yes, the demons can guess the future based on predictions, but they don't actually know or see the future. God is the only one who knows. Does that make sense? And actually, St. Anthony writes about that in detail. Sorry, St. Athanasius writes about that in detail in the life of Anthony. So bottom line, don't go to Ouija boards, don't go to the tarot card readers. How is it pronounced? Tarot? How's it pronounced? Tarot.
T-A-R-O-T. Right?
And it's spelled T-A-R-O-T.
Tarot.
But okay, but it's pronounced tarot, so the T is silent. So don't do any of that stuff. Who knows the supernatural and who knows the demonic? Sometimes demons can even try to guess the future to mess people up. Just be patient and rely on God day to day.